Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. So my name is Anango. I'm also a producer and rapper who goes by the name Samus. And I'm based out of Philadelphia, but I'm excited to be here in New York.
Hi, I'm Pat Bear. I'm a comedian and streamer, and I do a bunch of panels at a bunch of gaming and comic conventions.
Hi, my name is Benjamin Red. I worked in major AAA game development at a studio in Boston for 6 years, and now I make weird indie stuff on my own.
Awesome. So before we get into the meat of it, I also want to kind of talk about, we had alt text for this description because a lot of people talk about imposter syndrome as to why they don't submit panels. Does everyone here know what imposter syndrome is before I start carrying on? Do I need to define it for anyone? If so, please raise your hand. Okay. So imposter syndrome means you can be successful, you can be great, but you still think, I'm not really good enough. People think I'm faking it. And, there are people I know who are award-winning novelists who still have that moment of, but you keep giving me money to give you words and music and stuff like that. So that's what imposter syndrome is. So no matter how successful you are, you still feel like you haven't really made it. You don't deserve the fame that you're getting. So I want to talk about that and, kind of demystify how panels work because how many people here know the actual submission process for the panels that we had here or submitted a panel? Well, yeah, I would hope so. You were on a panel with me last year. So I want to talk about that and the experience each of you have with either submitting panels, having panels rejected. Actually, we're going to talk about rejection toward the end. So I know Pat's bursting to tell a story first, so then we can get to everyone's demystifying.
So we'll say that I do a comedy show as a panel. I'm going to do it here tomorrow at 2 o'clock in this very room called 404ing It. And so I, as a fan of going to conventions, decided one year I should start trying to do this. I'm going to submit this panel. And so I managed to submit and then get my very first panel I ever did anywhere was at PAX East. Which is a very large convention full of very well-known people. And the quote-unquote trick to it for me was I asked famous people I know to be on it and really stack the deck. Now, I didn't use it as an opportunity to showcase people that were unheard of. I do that now. I didn't use it as a way to be incredibly diverse and welcoming. I just got the most famous cis white straight men that I knew and loaded the panel so that it would get accepted. And then it did, and now I can do it, and I can bring people up that no one's ever heard of because I have a little bit of a name. So now I can have people that are awesome that maybe most people don't know, or that audience doesn't know. But my biggest trick was just it's Giant Bomb's founder Ryan Davis at the time, but rest in peace, had a huge internet following and was going to get approved for any panel he was on. So I asked him to be on my panel, and he said yes. And then apparently I found out later that the organizer at the time just reached out to the people to make sure that I was cool and that it was a real thing, and that I had asked them to be on it. Because at the time it was people that were known and kind of well known, but I wasn't. Also, the other thing is that panel that I do, I started as a comedy show, so I had footage of it. I had footage on YouTube as a thing. It existed. It just wasn't a panel at conventions, so I just modified it. But I still had to, I was very surprised to be in such a big space right off the bat. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. Don't start with PAX.
Yes. Samus, do you have other thoughts? Or if you want to swap the mic, feel free.
Oh, that's okay. I've got this little mic on my jacket. In terms of kind of demystifying, one of the panels that I facilitated was a panel at MagFest, the Music and Gaming Festival, and it was about kind of the business of geek and nerd music and how people can do that sustainably. And the reason why I submitted it was, I think, as Tanya was getting at, is that a lot of people kept asking me about it. So I think maybe the first place to start is what is the big question that either I have or that a lot of people keep coming to me to ask about. And so many folks were asking me, how do you get booked at different conventions? How do you monetize what you're doing? How do you kind of focus on the content that you're going to rap about? All of those questions. So to me, it started to feel like, oh, this is a no-brainer. If I submit this, this is something that folks here will be interested in. And I kind of looked at and asked around to see if that was something that had been covered in the past, and nobody had really sort of approached it in that way. So that was kind of my process of figuring out what panel I could submit and what had a good chance of being selected.
The first time I moderated a panel, it happened not because I set out to moderate a panel. This was like several years ago. Before game dev live streaming was really a thing, there were very few people who were into it. And I felt like for it to succeed, there needed to be more people into it. So I just started like evangelizing it because I liked it. That was really what started it. I just wanted people to do this thing. And so my friend was hosting lightning talks for like Boston Indies. And I was like, okay, I'll speak there. Because it was, basically anyone who signed up could talk. And so I just gave 7 minutes about like, this is why game dev live streaming is really cool. And then coincidentally, like a week after, that was when Twitch actually added, they did it very quietly. They didn't announce it or anything. They just like secretly added like a game development live stream channel to Twitch. And so I posted about it on social media, and it like went like quasi-viral. Like it got really popular, more than most things stupid things I've found on social media. Actually like Polygon picked it up and Gama Sutra. And so I was like feeling really like enthusiastic, and I was like, where else can I just like go to like tell people about this? And so I like asked some, like not very many people were doing it though. So I asked like the few people I knew who were like kind of like quasi acquaintance friends, like, would you be interested in like doing a panel about this? And they were like, yeah. And then they encouraged me to, and I never would have done this on my own, but they encouraged me to reach out to people who were like fairly like well known or like famous, like for doing game dev live streaming. And I did, and they said yes. And then we pitched the panel, and everything went great, and it was lovely. But I didn't like go in with that intent. It just kind of happened, I guess.
Yeah, for me, it was kind of an accident because for those that don't know my background, because I realized I was the only person who didn't actually introduce myself. I talk a lot on the internet, a lot about gaming, diversity, feminism, race, etc. And I Need Diverse Games came about because I was mad about video games at 6 in the morning one day before work. And because I got some attention, I got asked to be on panels about diversity. And being a black chick and being a queer black chick, those are the panels I kept being put on, and I got tired of that. Because there's other things I can talk about, and we'll get into that too, is that if you're a person of color, if you're queer, don't let yourself get sucked into only being on those panels. Don't be the diversity person on the diversity panel. So I started submitting other things. I stream. I want to talk about that because a lot of people are afraid to stream. They're afraid to do that. So there are things that I want to talk about that were not just about race or sexuality or orientation. And I would submit it, and I would ask my friends, hey, if I submit this panel, will you be on it? Or are you going to this con? And if this panel gets submitted, I have a chance to add you. Would you want to do it? Talk to your friends. I'm sure that some of them probably would want to be on panels if you just ask them. Or, I know this seems weird, Twitter actually works. It's how I met everyone on this panel, actually. So, Twitter can be a good networking thing. And that actually segues right into what I want to talk about next, which is collaborate, or AKA the practical shit. Because let's be real, there's a lot of stuff where people just literally don't know where to start in getting panels put together and how reaching out to talk about a panel. Because I've tweeted out, hey, I want to do a panel at PAX West, who's interested, and people will reply. So I want to start with Sam's, because you did panels at MagFest and at Game Developer of Color Expo. Mm-hmm. So if they weren't something you submitted, like how did that collaboration happen? How did you wind up on the panel?
So in terms of panels that I've submitted, I think going back to this MagFest panel, I thought about, okay, what are areas that I don't have expertise and who can kind of fill in those gaps? And what kinds of questions might people want answered that I can't provide answers for, or that, this person or that person might not be able to. So I reached out to My friend Mega Ran, who's another MC who also draws heavily on kind of video game content, because he can offer perspectives on what it means to be like licensed by being officially licensed by a video game company, and he's been able to do that with his music. I tapped into a DJ named DJ Cutman because he has a chiptunes label. And so he has kind of expertise in that regard. And I reached out to a friend, Richie Branson, because he makes like memes and like memes that are engaged with video game content. And so he has kind of an understanding of that side of the business of things. So I really think for me, it was like, okay, who has different kinds of expertise and what can they offer? And in the panels that I've been asked about, I think it's a similar thing where my question is like, okay, how can I contribute to this broader perspective? And with the person who's kind of asking me, just asking them what their hope is for the panel, what they're hoping to provide from all the panelists, and then seeing what my strengths are and working from there.
Yeah, we're talking about collaboration. I'm on this panel because I tweeted out that, hey, if anyone needs a moderator at Gaymerx East, I'm here and available because as a demisexual who basically just exists mostly as like a straight man, sort of, kind of, I know that there are other voices that should be raised up way more than mine. So I was like, if you need a moderator, if me being involved will help your panel get on, let me know. And then Jenna was like, well, would you want to be on a panel? And I was like, okay. I mean, yes, but that wasn't like my goal was to like, I didn't want to be on 6 panels at this show because I know what this show is and I know what should be the panels here. And I think that's important for any convention. If you're like looking at a convention that you really like, you're going to, you want to do a panel there, look to see what they're missing, and then find out if they're like a bunch of the stuff I do at PAX is comedy related, and they're looking for that. They're looking for evening entertainment. I do a lot of panels that are at night because they want alternatives to the concerts. They want to have panels that are like more presentational, that aren't just talks about video games or board games. And I know they're looking for that, and I know I can put together something that they're going to like, so that works for me. But there are other conventions that are like, we don't want entertainment. We want just people talking about things. We want things that are very educational or informative or talks about the industry. So like people are like, oh, you're going to go to GDC. There's no reason for me to go to GDC. It's incredibly important for the people that are going there, but they're not looking for the kind of panels that I'm going to run. So it wouldn't make any sense for me to pitch a comedy show for them.
Can you explain what GDC is?
The Game Developers Conference. It's really great for devs, for people who are developers in the industry. There's some press there and some announcements, but it's not really a press event, and it's not really an event for like casual game fans. But because I have friends who work in games, they often ask if I'm coming. But it just that convention doesn't make any sense for me. And even something like DICE wouldn't make any sense. But I should go to MagFest, and I haven't been. But MagFest, I think, would be awesome. And I would be able to put something on there that people would be into. Because it's lovers of music and games and a really fun weekend. So like that would make sense for me to submit to. But like I don't know what I would do at E3 other than like spend too much money to go there.
Yeah.
Oh, can I real quick just something I forgot to add is even in terms of being practical is maybe having a spreadsheet or a document that has like submission deadlines. I'm really bad with deadlines, so I have so many sticky notes like on my desktop. So reminders, things you can put into your like Google Calendar or having an accountability partner. But yeah, if you know you're not good at deadlines, maybe having them like maybe at the top of the year, the top of the month, just looking at what's going to be due when.
Yeah.
Everyone has said it already, but just to really reiterate it because it's really valuable. Like if you want to like do a panel or be on a panel, find other people and like combine forces and collaborate and work together, because the pitch that you put together with all those people on it, like sometimes it can be the difference between actually getting the panel approved or not. That actually probably happened to me also in the example of the live dev streaming. Like, I honestly don't know if the same panel would have gotten approved if I hadn't had like those big names that I just spontaneously reached out for. Don't annoy people who are like famous or have some notoriety and are probably getting like lots of emails on a daily basis. But I would also say, like, take some risk. Like, if you are pitching a panel that someone could genuinely, like, in their own interest, like, want to be on because it makes sense for their career as well, reach out to them, because I was really surprised. I was so certain that the people I contacted were gonna just like delete the email, but no, it worked out really well. So I'm really nervous about stuff like that. So I just want to encourage anyone else who might feel that way, step outside your comfort zone a little bit. And so then also, with regard of whether you're looking for other people to panel with or you're actually submitting the application, one thing I would strongly recommend is like put together, I guess, or kind of like lead with what really qualifies you as the individual who should be hosting like any particular panel, whatever credentials you might have. So like, again, using the live streaming example, like I linked the post that I made that went quasi-viral and the news articles, like just to demonstrate like this is clearly something that people are interested in. This is something that people want to hear about. Like this is going to make your like the content for the convention more well-rounded and more interesting. Like this is something that when people see it on the program, it's going to stand out to them. And so like it doesn't need to be like it doesn't need to be the sort of thing you would put on a resume necessarily, because it doesn't have to be like strictly formal. Like if you're pitching a panel about your favorite video game, like include like a link to your Steam profile that has like 5,000 played hours of the game. Just something, because the person who's reading this panel application or pitch, they don't necessarily know who you are, and anything you can do to give them that full picture of who you are and why you're the right person to be giving this panel, that's going to that could be the difference between them approving your panel or not.
I want to just jump in there real quick. Take advantage of that "Tell me about you" section on the form. The thing that's not going to go on the website, not going to go to the program. That's just for the people that are reading. I'm sure, Tanya, you have a lot to say about reading panel submissions more than us, but I know that I've gotten way farther in moving things forward, even if it didn't get to the panel, getting feedback from people, is by really being like, hey, this is why I want to do this. Here's more information about, other than just where they work, the people that are doing it. Here's a link to other examples. Here's how we could change this. I see that you don't have a projector. I can bring a projector to your event. Like, I have equipment. I can make this work. I know you don't normally do this, but like, really, you have to sell yourself, and it's hard. I've gotten pretty used to it now, using Twitter and using other people's streams and using friends of friends and going through all that, like asking people you don't know who are famous. I work on another panel that is a video game wrestling themed, and so once a year we have to get 30 people, and so we reach high. We see, oh, this writer is a guest of honor at that event. Do we know anyone who knows that person? Can we get their contact info? Can we explain to them what the fuck our panel is? And the best we can, but like we reach high because we want to draw in new names. And the other thing is, if you succeed in that way, now you have a list of people who've done your panel that are like good names that will hopefully encourage other people. Like, oh, this person did it. It's like, oh, Tim Schafer did our weird thing, so you could, like, I don't know. Yes, we've had Swery do our, in full wrestling gear, do our wrestling panel, so it makes it a little easier when we ask indie devs who don't know who we are but might be interested in doing something different. I think the number one thing is that you just have to treat it like it's a job, even if it is a thing that's your passion. If you're like, I really want to talk about this missing thing from games, this thing that I'm passionate about. But doing a panel, if you treat it like this is my part-time job this weekend, is I'm doing a panel. And so I'm doing all the legwork to get hired to do that panel. Treat it professional, and then people I think respond well to that. I think the number one thing I hear from people that I work with when I do panels is that, like, oh, you're really on top of this, and you know where it is and when it is, and you know what we were asking for and all that. It's like, you did all the research. And it's like, well, yeah, I don't want to seem like this is a thing that if you don't accept me, then I'll just be like, fine about it. I'm going to be bummed if I don't get to do it.
Yeah, and I'll talk really quick on the back end side of things. So not just Gaymerx, but other conventions. WizCon, which is a feminist sci-fi convention, which is the opposite spectrum of what we're doing now, and OrcaCon, which is coming up in January. I review a lot of the panels. So first and foremost, use Spellcheck. It is your friend. Google has it. There's no excuse if you don't have a regular program. Use Spellcheck. Have someone read it over. Say, if you read this panel, would you go to it? But also think about what am I bringing to the convention? Because this is going to sound terrible, but I know a lot of people submit bullshit panels in the hope of just getting a free pass to their favorite convention. That's not a good reason to panel. That's not a good reason to take up an hour of time on stage when someone else could have had better content. Think about what it is and why you're going, and also think about the people you're asking to panel. Because I get a lot of people who ask me about code camps, stuff like that, or making games. I have never made a game in my life. I have a half-finished Twine game somewhere in Google somewhere, but I've never made a game. I talk about these things a lot, but people make assumptions. So actually research the people that you want to invite to panel with you. Make sure that they're a fit for what you want to talk about. And, again, don't be afraid to reach out on Twitter. But, use your resources. And what I do is I then keep a speaker history. So for those that ever want to talk at the Game Developer Conference, you have to tell them where you've spoken. You have to talk about what you've done. Keep a running Google Doc. And if anyone wants to see it, I'm happy to share it. It's not a secret document. And also keep a bio. Keep a short bio in case you've written articles. Keep a long bio if you ever get to be a guest at anything. Like a 250, 150 bite size and a much longer, like almost CV length bio, so that no matter what you're submitting to, you've got something on deck, and update it. If you change jobs, you change industries, keep it up to date. Look at it every couple of months if you don't have a lot of change going on in your life. Ask someone to review it. Don't be afraid, and ask someone who's going to give you actual feedback. Don't ask your buddy, can you look at this? Ask someone who's going to be real with you, because it is not useful or helpful for your buddy to review something and not give you legit feedback. So we've talked about all the practical shit. Titles, because titles suck. You always have to submit a title and a description. I'm bad at it. I know I'm bad at it. 2 years of podcasting has not helped me be better at titles or descriptions. So this can be funny or serious. How do you come up with titles, or do you just kind of submit it and say, title could come later?
If it's a new idea, it's the last thing I think of or the first thing I think of. I'm a comedian by trade, so dumb puns and dumb names are kind of second nature to me. I'm a build streamer right now. I do model kits, Gundam, and Lego. And the reason I do that is because in the shower, the Build with Bear workshop. And I was like, well, that has to be a thing. And now it is a thing, and I'm very proud of it, and I'm very happy to do it. But it is just a thing that I followed through because a dumb idea came to me. This year, I was like, oh, what if we did an improvised version of postmortems? Those short little talks about what went wrong and what went right with a game that they do at conventions. And I was like, I just call it the improvised postmortem. I could probably come up with a better title than that, but it tells you what it is. If you see it on the schedule and you don't click on it, you at least know improvised postmortem. Okay. My hope is that your title tells me what it is, and then I can find out more. But if I look on the East schedule today and look at what's up next, I'll be like, okay, I know. At least I know what that is. I think that's, to me, is especially if you're just starting out and you don't have a bunch of people that are going to come because they don't know who you are and you want to try to catch their eye. Don't lie. Make it an actual real thing. But yeah, I don't know if you have to be clever or funny, but I think you should be honest about what the panel is going to be.
Yep.
Yeah, and with me, my experience has been, either trying to come up with metaphors for what you're talking about as it relates to the kind of broader themes of the convention or event or space. So again, with this MagFest panel, the theme was like leveling up, how to monetize your career or something to that effect, which works well in that space. Another thing to think about is possibly thinking about like buzzwords or what words that have a lot of like cultural cachet that will leap out to folks. So I was on a panel at Comic-Con that was called like Afro-punks and blurs, and that word Afro-punk immediately, I think a lot of folks gravitate towards that. They know what that's about. They have heard of the festivals. They have some sense in their mind of what that's kind of signaling. So if you're able to attach yourself to a word that has a kind of a big meaning, but a meaning that resonates with a lot of folks and is like meaningful specifically in that moment, then that's a great way to go as well.
Just from a purely logistical perspective, do it as soon as possible. Like, you don't have to have your final version of like of all the copy and like the writing for your panel, but at a certain point, like a lot of conventions will actually print a like paper guide, and at that point you're locked in. So just like give yourself time, because even if you are happy with what you write up front, you might want to change it a little down the line. And part of that is because when you're working on a collaborative project, you like over the course of working with your fellow panelists, the vision and the core of the idea might even become more clear to you as some amount of time goes on. And yeah, like other people were saying, honesty is important. Like you don't, even if you can come up with something really appealing, but that doesn't reflect your panel, like that's not good. In fact, on the other hand, you can use the description text, like the paragraph that they give you, to let people know what will be the tone of the conversation in the panel too. So like when you're broadcasting, this is going to be a very comedy panel, like, make that description as funny as possible. If it's going to be a very technical talk, let people know going in, just so that people, halfway through the talk aren't going to be stepping out because they didn't understand half of what was going on.
And the other thing too is remember that the panel title is the hook, but be honest, because I've been to so many panels where it's like the panel and description said one thing, but then when the panel started, you're just kind of like, this is not what I signed up for. So if your panel changes in tone, if it changes anything else, and you can change it with the convention runners once it's accepted, please do so, because at least with PAX, they'll say your panel's accepted. You have until X date to make changes. And after that date, then the app and the website can be changed, but not the print guide. So just think about it too, is that you do have some flexibility usually, but try to get the gist of it and be as concise as possible, because people are flipping through an app or a paper book. They're not going to read a long wall of text. So think about that as well.
A nice little thing also talking about the PAX submission is that for all their panels, when you fill out the form, on the right side, they list 2 submissions they really like and what the description is as kind of like a guide. And they're just like easy, just like normal panels, but like it's just as though here's something that was well read and we looked at it and we were like, oh, we'll accept that panel, which I think a lot of times people look at that and go, I don't know what to say, I don't know how to sell myself, and it's a skill and you have to just do it. But like, yeah, start early. Don't do it when it's the night before submissions are due and you're staring at that page going, how do I sell this? Like, have a rough draft. Have a basic one that you use, that anytime you're going to submit this panel to anywhere, that you can just like edit and do whatever. I think like give yourself more than a night to submit your panel.
Yeah, and I would also add, what was I going to say? Dang. I'll come back to it.
It's okay. That thought ran away.
One other small piece of incentive to keep in mind when you're writing your panel is that you're probably going to be on a program up against in the same time slot as other panels. So you want something that will make people choose yours.
Yeah, totally.
Speaking of that, because we were chatting about it a bit before, is that you'll get rejected. It's just a matter of course. for whatever social cachet people think I have, I've gotten rejected so many times from submitting panels. The stuff I submitted for PAX Unplugged was rejected. It's not, don't get an idea of, oh, I've done all these panels, no one's going to ever reject me again. That is so not true. Just get used to it. But it's not the end of the world if you do get rejected. But, you know, if it's your first time ever submitting, or you got one thing submitted and accepted but not the other, it can be very devastating. So funny, not funny, lesson learned. I'll start with Benjamin. Something you submitted and got rejected and what you got out of it.
So I, kind of going back to the idea that, you know, not every idea is unique. Oftentimes, like, even if you think you have a very original idea, there might be other people pitching to the same convention the exact same idea that you have, which goes back to, you know, kind of why it's important to put a lot of thought and really demonstrate why your pitch is the right pitch. That actually happened to me. I forget which year it was, but I essentially, like, my pitch was, and I thought this was like wild, like innovative, like mind-blowing. Everyone was going to be completely floored. Like, they were just going to accept the idea because it was just so clever. I was going to actually, like, host a game jam in a panel.
Ooh, I like that.
It didn't get accepted, but I've since seen that panel on other conventions' programs. So good for them. What happened? Actually, oh yeah, no, I do know what year that was, because it was actually the same year that I submit the other panel. And going in, I submit multiple panels. One got accepted, one didn't. And so even though, like, I got rejected, like, it still works out because I kind of, like, you know, I didn't put all my eggs in one basket, I guess.
Yeah, so I won't say the name of the convention because we're on the stream, but I did submit to a panel to a convention this year. The panel I'm doing tomorrow, just a different cast, and a good cast, like good people that would have been right for it. And I didn't get accepted, and then I found out later that they weren't accepting comedy panels, which I didn't ask about. I never asked, like, hey, do you have a focus for what your panels are? It was just like an all-purpose convention that I thought would be into it. Turns out they had a comedy stage, which I did not apply for, but I don't know how I would have applied for if I didn't know about it. So next year, I will reach out to those people and be like, hey, are you doing a comedy stage? Should I submit this as a panel? Let me know what you think. I didn't do that legwork. So it was a good lesson for me because, like, doing conventions at big conventions, sometimes makes you think, like, oh, well, the small ones are going to want me. And it's like, that might be true, but they might also just not be, your panel might not be right for them, which I think, like, I'm way more happy to find out that they just weren't accepting the type of panel I was doing, rather than they looked at my panel, looked at who was doing it, and were like, nah, not right for us. Because they would be wrong if that was the case, because it would have been real good. But then instead it wasn't right. It wasn't the right fit, and I'll take that because there's plenty of conventions that were probably not right for really thoughtful academic panels, and a lot of the panels that you're going to find this weekend here might be considered too overlapping because some of the larger conventions out there are looking at their, like, diversity track, and they're like, well, we're going to accept 11 panels about different races and how they feel about how they're represented in the industry. We got 15 that submitted for that, so we're only going to pick 11. Whereas here it might be like, oh, no, we're going to put that one and that one and that one, and do you know these people are doing this? And they might be very excited about it. I think, like, sometimes you're just like, it's also okay to just be mad and think that people who made the decisions are wrong. I'm always going to advocate that sometimes people are wrong and your stuff is good, and they just don't know it yet. And they're going to be so psyched when you submit the next year because they're going to be like, oh, we can get that person. They won't even remember they rejected you because they're going to be excited about it again because you've grown in a year. But yeah, like, it sucks. Rejection is, like, the worst. It's a terrible thing, especially if you, like, put a lot of effort into putting something cool together. But it shouldn't stop you from doing it. I we'll never have 404ing it at New York Comic Con, but I'm going to submit every year until it's right and it works. But I'm always going to submit that show because now it's what I do. I submit to New York Comic Con every year to be rejected from New York Comic Con. But this year I did a panel. Cards Against Humanity did an improv show that I was able to guest on. I was very happy. So I got to do a New York Comic Con panel. So I'm very happy about that. And now I could be like, well, I performed at New York Comic Con before. Here's this good panel I do. Please, this year? No? Okay. Yeah, I made it a tradition to be rejected.
Yeah, and I was rejected from a festival panel, I think partially because I did what everyone has been saying not to do. I thought about it like 2 days before it was supposed to be due, and so in terms of reaching out to folks who I thought would be a good fit, it was about kind of caring for our mental health as artists. And I reached out to folks but didn't hear back, so I didn't, obviously didn't feel comfortable putting them down, so I didn't. So it felt a little bit incomplete, and then another part of it was there was like a whole other stage where folks had to vote on panels. And so I just hadn't put the kind of time and energy, I didn't have the time and energy at that point to kind of follow up on it and share about it and get the votes and get the likes. And so I think if you are submitting to something like that, I think South by Southwest does that and some other festivals, know that make sure that you have the time to like promote and actively kind of campaign around your panel, because my schedule at that time was so crazy that the thought of adding something else onto it just wasn't in my best interest. So I kind of, I just let it sit instead of like pushing it the way that I would have liked to push it. So yeah, just make sure you have the time and carve out time, as they were all saying, to actually work on it, do some like pre-production work before you submit.
And I also want to talk about, be aware of the kind of convention/conference you were submitting to, because I submitted to the Game Developers Conference again for the next year. And my co-panelists and I, we started working on this like 3 months ago. So think about something where it's like the Game Developers Conference, New York Comic Con, one of the bigger PAXs, is that you can't sit there and go, oh, I'm just going to throw a panel together and put it out there and then be surprised you get rejected. Mm-hmm. And for a professional con like at the level of GDC, you not only have to submit it early, you have to think about the work you're doing. It's a very long application process. You also have to get your deck or slide deck into them early. Mm-hmm. So you have to think about these things of, if this panel gets submitted, am I going to then do the work? Don't be the person that's like 2 days before the panel, it's like, oh, I guess I should talk to my panelists, especially if you're the moderator, because if you're like that with me on a panel, that'll be the first and last time I panel with you. Be a good moderator, be a good panelist. Don't be afraid to offer to moderate, but keep people on time. And this actually works out well because we got about 20 minutes left, and this is the part that I enjoy doing because I'm that kind of moderator. If you are the one in charge of it, keep the conversation moving. Don't let people hog the mic. But when you get to Q&A, keep it to Q&A. The Q is for question. Anyone who's ever seen me do a panel knows this is how I am. If you don't have a relevant question, keep it in your pocket. We have a half hour between panels. I will talk to you after. Any of us will. But have a good question, a relevant question, and a concise question. And if, depending on what you're talking about, because we haven't talked about content really, if what you're talking about could have potentially triggering topics or something where you kind of want to really mediate the conversation, bring note cards, pass them out to the audience in advance. That way we can kind of rifle through them and moderate your questions. Like, okay, we can take these 5 questions from the audience. That's all we have time for. And that way you kind of control it. Because I'm not sure who went to TwitchCon, but even though I was moderating, a lot of the people had really irrelevant questions. You can't control what someone asks you, but as a moderator, it's your job to kind of keep that conversation moving and make people stay on topic as much as they can. And that's both your panelists and yourself. Because some people like to talk, and they really should be a panelist versus a moderator. Know your own strength in that regard either. And even if you submit a panel, realize you don't have to be the one to moderate it. Because there are panels that, I've helped people with or that I've submitted. It's like, you know what, I'm submitting it out in the wild. If it gets accepted, great. But I don't have to necessarily moderate the conversation unless it's something I really feel strongly about.
Yeah, and if I can jump on that as well, from the moderator perspective, just kind of knowing your panelists is really good. So one of the panels that I moderated, I knew that there was a particularly Chatty Patty on one of them, who was going to talk for a really, really long time unless they were kind of curtailed. So I put like times, when I sent out the notes of what we were going to talk about, I said we have 10 minutes to discuss this. And I think that these folks might be the best folks to talk about this. And then we're going to have 10 minutes to discuss this. And in that way, it was just kind of structuring the situation, knowing that there were some folks who might not talk as much. And so really, giving them focusing on their strengths and saying, I think you would be great to chat about, what it means to make a music video or something like that. And yeah, so just as a moderator, knowing that that's also a part of your responsibility, I think is good. So thank you for that.
Anything else before we open up the floor for questions?
Just on the content front, this is a good thing to chat with your panelists about what you're going to be doing if there's any content that you don't do ahead of time. So the show that I'm going to do here tomorrow, we look at fun internet stuff, and usually the panelists and I don't discuss it beforehand. I want to get their live reactions just like the audience has a live reaction. And so occasionally I've been like, hey, here's a trigger warning. This next video has gunfire in it, live gunfire in it, just to be worried. One time I was like, here's a video about spiders. And my panelist freaked out because she was very scared of spiders. And it's something that I was like, oh no, we have another video of spiders later in the show. And it's like it's a funny bit where I'm like, oh, just kidding, we're going to talk about spiders again. And I was like, I still want to do that joke. I can't do that joke. I have to talk to my panelists right now about this. I hadn't thought about it. And that's just, a small little example, but especially if you're giving a talk on topics and there might be a subtopic that a panelist isn't willing to talk about or afraid to talk about, or you didn't think to mention it, just try to be thoughtful about the content of your panel and how some people may be fine with it and other people may wish that they had a chance to leave the room. I've done that before where I'm like, hey, we're going to show a video that might not be suitable for everybody, and we're going to show it last, so now's your chance to leave, because it was a weird 3D video that was kind of disturbing, so I gave people an out if they didn't want to watch it. And I think that's just, it's one of those things where I don't know if that's going to be the difference between you getting a panel in or not, but I think it's best practices for running a panel, and I think that people appreciate that are working on the conventions.
Yep.
Just a few things that have kind of been touched on, but just they kind of bear repeating. When you're picking a topic for your panel, pick something that you're really passionate about. Don't try and be cooler than you are, because the most interesting panels are the ones where people really nerd out about something that they really care about. When you're getting feedback for your material, well, so for one thing, I don't know if it's been said outright, but get feedback from people before you submit the materials. As specifically, if you have a friend who's a little too honest to the point of being mean, get their feedback too, because it doesn't hurt to hear the contrary opinion too. Even if you don't adapt for that opinion, it's kind of good to know what you're up against going in. And then, again, just pitch multiple panels, pitch to multiple conventions, because oftentimes conventions get so many pitches that the ideas they're cutting, the panels they're cutting are really good ones, and they would have wanted to if they had more time on the schedule. So don't feel dejected. Pitch again, and it'll probably work out at some point.
Okay, so it is that fun time of the panel where we take Q&A. If you do not have a question and you start with I have a comment, I'm going to ask you to go find a question and come back. You all think I'm joking. So don't let that scare you off. I'm really not that mean, mostly. So questions, we got about 15 minutes left. You all came to this panel for a reason. Yes?
Since there's often a large space between submitting and the actual convention, how would you suggest doing things that are hot topic issues at the time of submission, but may change by the time the convention actually rolls around?
Me personally, I avoid hot topic things because A, it could no longer be relevant by the time that panel actually happens. And B, a lot of people jump on the hot topic thing. Just because something is talked about incessantly doesn't mean that there needs to be a panel about it 6 months down the road. But if there's something that keeps coming up and it's hot topic only in that it's come up yet again, like diversity in games or, stuff that's going on now that may come up again in 3 months, you have a chance to get more nuance to it. And, you're not probably going to be the only person. So it's figure out what your angle is and why you should have the chance to have this hour-long, 40-minute-long discussion, but don't jump on the hot topic bandwagon. Because again, like for convention I worked with WizCon, we took panels up until January, and we had a 3-month cycle of reviewing and editing and things like that. So, and then the convention itself wasn't until May. So for me, I would say avoid hot topic-y things because it's kitschy, and like for me, I'm never going to go because I probably have had my fill of it well before that panels happen. But what do you all think?
I think, the question was about hot topic issues as submissions, and then the actual convention is so much later after the submission process. I think that you have to look at the broader context of it. Like, obviously, right now, I'm sure that there are people submitting panels to places that are going to be focused on sexual harassment because we're in some instances finally talking about it in all industries, especially in different entertainment industries. We're talking about that now, so it's fresh in people's minds. So I think it's like you just have to try to maybe broaden it to like, we discussed this in 2017, what about 2018? Or a historical look at this topic might appeal to people more than just, well, people are talking about it. Let's get some people that are advocates within the industry to talk about that now. If you can take the long view on it, it might not feel like a hot topic. It might feel like just a necessary panel.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how well this answers the question, but sometimes using something is just like a frame of reference in your submission. So, for example, a few folks might remember when Alex Trebek dissed nerdcore as a genre, and so people were up in arms, and so I remember referencing how Jeopardy, how this genre of music was discussed on Jeopardy, and so that to me signifies that it's gaining this sort of broader cultural relevance, and so that's why we should talk about how artists can pursue this, to as careers, as potential careers. So that was just a way for me to signal that this is a part of a bigger discussion that's now happening. Yeah.
Awesome. We still have time. Don't just stare at us. Yes, and then I'll get your question. So for those that may not have been able to hear on the stream, the question was, how do you do a good job of describing your panel? Because it'll change, it'll evolve a bit, correct? So I have thoughts, but I've talked a lot, even as the moderator. So anyone else have thoughts?
Just as a writing tip, I tend to, they ask you, 4 or 5 sentences, right? It's supposed to be very concise. But just when I'm approaching challenges like that, I'll write a page and a half because I know it's not all going in, but I also know that just the way that I write, I'll get to the idea. By the time I've written a page and a half, I'll have gotten to the core idea, and it'll just kind of gel in my own mind a little more. So it's kind of like the rubber duck trick in programming, which is basically you just have a rubber duck that sits on your desk and you just talk to it, because you don't necessarily actually need another person to act as a sounding board. Just the act of talking through it will gel it. And so there's no guarantee that you'll have gotten all of it just because you've taken these steps, but you never really know that, right? So you can only do the best that you can at any given time.
And I would say use that, I mentioned earlier, that extra space that they give to here's any additional details you want to provide. Put that in there. Say, in discussions with my panelists, I think we're going to probably modify this a little bit over time. I want to be honest with you that at this very moment, this is what we think the panel will be, but we're open for feedback from you, and we're open for internal feedback, and so it may change slightly, and we'll update you when we know. Like the more information you give, the better, because sometimes, I've been to panels where I was like, oh, I can see where you started with this idea, but then logistically you realize that's not possible, so now you're doing this. But your show description does not match that, or even give an indication. Like if you have like, oh, we're going to do a game jam. Oh, we can't do that live. So we're going to do it over the weekend before and then review the games we made last weekend. That's a different panel. You got there because you realized you couldn't do it live. But it doesn't say, like, so you put that in there. We may end up doing it like this because we can't do it the way we originally intended.
So, like, on that vein, when you're pitching a panel, make sure it's something you can do. Like, don't pitch
that's
something.
good too. Actually, that's really good advice we should have said earlier.
And if you do find that you have realized that there's this better idea and it's evolved too far, save that for another panel. Like, stick to your vision, like deliver on the original vision that you pitched, and then submit that to the next year or to another panel, and make that one happen too.
Do you have anything, Anango?
No, I think everybody was
Okay.
said the right things.
Yeah.
Unless you're a brain surgeon, in which case that
Yeah.
sounds like a good panel.
Yeah, can't do that live, though. It's a little messy. Don't get an idea.
I mean, you can't say that to me. I'm trying to think about how you could do a brain surgery panel cleanly. I mean, I'll come back to it.
Okay. And then you gotta.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you felt that in your experience, if there was an ideal size, like number of panels. I've seen panels of 10 people that went off great, but thought to myself, I would not want to be the moderator.
So for those folks watching that may not have heard, the question was, how do you kind of determine a good size of a panel? This is a good size. I've been on panels that have been a little unwieldy, but I wasn't the moderator. And you could look on my face and see that I was glad I was not the moderator of those panels. I would say anywhere from 4 to 6 at the absolute max would be good. Yeah. It also depends on the format. Is it we're doing this kind of Q&A and discussion and going back to the audience? Is it everyone gets a mini slot to present? Because I've been on panels where it was like everyone had their 5 to 7 minutes, and then we did overall Q&A, where you're timing it, everyone has to fit within a slot. But I think after 6, it gets to be too much, because both from a making sure everyone can talk perspective, but also at 6 people, that's just a lot to manage. I've been on podcasts where we've had 6 people, and it's glad I'm not the one that has to edit this audio later.
Also, from a production standpoint, 6 people is the perfect amount for you to back out. If you're one of 6 people doing a panel, it's really easy to be like, you'll be fine. You've got 5 people. If you're one of 3 people on a panel, if you're a third of a panel and you're like, I'd really actually rather go do this other thing, then you're an asshole. So keeping it small makes people want to, that's obviously, if there are reasons, there are reasons. But if you're one of 8 people, it can be a really lazy reason why you're suddenly not putting the effort in, because you're just one of many. I've definitely had that panel where I was like, oh, you didn't think about this till today because you're one of 8 people. But if you're one of 4 people, you hopefully put the work in, because you know that you're a big part of that panel.
Yeah, I agree with Tanya. Any more than 6 is, it sounds like you've had an experience of seeing a panel with a lot of folks that worked well, but that has not been my experience. For the most part, any more than 6, it just gets a little bit chaotic and messy, and I, feel uncomfortable trying to find where to insert myself, so I end up not saying anything, and then I'm just kind of sitting there staring at my cup of water or whatever. And so I feel like that 6, 4 to 6 number seems to be a pretty good place.
Yeah. And the other part of it too is, no matter how good of a moderator you are, at some point you can't really feel out personalities, because everyone has strengths and weaknesses. I know I can be a chatty asshole on panels. I know I can. I know this is a weakness of mine. But if someone doesn't know you well and they've just asked you to join a panel and you haven't had a chance to interact, you're also putting the moderator in a difficult position. Mm-hmm. So think about that too. It's how many people do I really need to talk about this topic?
Mm-hmm.
I had a panelist drop out at the last minute because he had to move to Australia because his wife got a residency or something. So it doesn't hurt to have a couple extra panelists,
That's
or
that what?
I mean, I was really happy for her. Like, she got into a really good program, and happy for him. And I guess they had a great time in Australia, so it did work out. But I had, I had people kind of that I knew I was going to ask as backup too. So
Backups are great. The panel I'm doing tomorrow, I had someone drop out about a month ago, which I totally understand, and it was fine. That's going to happen. I've got a panel in 2 weeks that I'm like, I wonder if one of these people is actually going to do this or not. And so I'm like making steps to prepare myself for that possibility. I don't want that to be a possibility, but like, especially the nice thing is when you're a month out from the convention, the schedule should be up, or at least some of the schedules should be up. So you can look and see who else is going, because that's actually one of the things that's, to me, the hardest part of submitting a panel is like 7 months before a thing going like, who do I know that would be there? And like and then you're like, oh, I didn't know you were going to that. You would have been great on this, because like it's so far away. Which is why Twitter's great. You're just like, who's going to Gaymerx East? And then you find out like, oh, you're coming down from Canada? Oh, that's awesome. I didn't know that. You're coming from Seattle? Great. You're not going, but you live in New York? I don't understand. You know?
That's legit. So we got a couple minutes left. Any other? Yes.
So I recently had a panel go very, very badly.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And since then, I've been getting a lot of rejection. How do I come back from this?
The panel, the place where it went badly, was it just overall experience? Or if you don't want to talk about it on the stream, that's fine. But I would reach out to the people at the convention where it went badly and ask for feedback, or if you got feedback from the panel. If there's a recording, kind of review it, and then touch base with the people you were paneling with and go, clearly something did not go well, let's talk about it so we can avoid this in the future. And maybe even bring up, hey, you may have heard about X panel at this thing, it didn't go well, it was either out of my control, or, going forward, I plan to manage it better. I would say just be upfront, because that's a really crappy feeling to know or to think. But I would say just be upfront when you do more submissions, and make a list of who not to panel with, and that's something you should not be afraid to do. I have a very long list of people I will never, ever panel with. Love them. We'll go out and drink with them, have dinner. I will never be on a panel with you or ask you to collaborate in my life. Don't be afraid to do that. It doesn't make you an asshole. So those people that you panel with and it went badly, start your list with them.
And if being open with panels and you still feel like you're being rejected because of this prior incident, if after a while that's still happening, then you can be sneaky about it and have someone that you really like collaborating with submit the panel for you. So you're not the contact person on that. You're just a person involved in it. It's not your show. It's just a show you're a part of. Because if you feel like you have unnecessary baggage put on you, I think it's totally okay to be like, oh, well, I'm not the focus of this. It's my friend that everyone likes, and I'm just helping out. I think that even though I've been promoting honesty a lot, I think if you get a bad rap, you got to do what you can to make the best of it, and that includes like occasionally just being like, oh, I'm just working behind the scenes on this, and oh, it went well. Congratulations to everybody. But yeah, I don't think I've ever had a panel go bad like that, but I've definitely been to panels where I was like, oh, this is there's gonna be conversation about this.
Yeah, so I'm gonna tell myself the first PAX I went to, there was a really, really bad diversity panel, and I was one of those assholes online talking about it. I freely admit it. Turns out these were some poor teenagers who should have never been on this panel by themselves without an adult. And, think about that too. If you had a chance to vet panels or go to panels, think about that for a minute, because I felt terrible after. But, they should have never been allowed to have that panel, because it was like 3 teenagers who really didn't know what they were talking about, but yet someone approved this panel. And I'm just going to be that person, because we have like 30 seconds left. Have someone submit it. If it gets approved, get added to the panel after it's approved. I know it's a terrible piece of advice and a horrible lie to tell, but if it's a way to kind of get back in the good graces of folks, you didn't submit it, you got added on later. Oh, well. So we're out of time, but quickly, social media, where can folks find you?
At Samus Music everywhere, and that's SAMMUS, the word music. Thank you so much.
I'm Pat Baer, PATBAER. I'm on Twitch. I'm on Twitter. I do live streams. I'm going to be on Giant Bomb's Extra Life stream tonight with Alex Navarro. He's been drumming all day for Extra Life and Rock Band, and I'm going to go hang out so that he doesn't pass out alone. So check that out tonight.
I recently quit all social media run by like evil corporations, and so there are probably like 2 people in here on Mastodon. You can find me at Benj BENJ _RED at cyberspace CYBRE.SPACE.
And I'm Cypher too. You're probably sick of seeing me on the internet because I talk a lot. All right, half-hour break, and then I'm actually back in here with Samus and a couple other folks talking about F You Pay Me, which is why I'm wearing this shirt. So, thank you.
Thank you for coming out.